My parents sold my house while I was overseas, but my grandfather left them a trap they never saw coming. My name is Hannah Carter, and at 34 years old, I thought I understood betrayal. I was wrong, because nothing prepares you for the moment you discover that the people who raised you have been secretly planning to steal the one thing you love most. And nothing prepares you for finding out they already did it. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories with unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe. Now let me tell you what happened. The message arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was standing nearly 5,000 miles away from home, working on a major infrastructure project in Spain. My days started before sunrise and ended long after dark. Most nights I was too exhausted to think about anything except sleep. That's why I almost ignored the notification. Almost. The text came from my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, a woman who had lived across the street from me for over 20 years. Attached was a photo, and underneath it were only 4 words. Hannah, is this true? I opened the image. The world seemed to stop moving. My coffee slipped from my hand and splashed across the hotel floor. Because the photo showed my house. My grandfather's house. The small white home with the green shutters. The home I inherited. The home I planned to grow old in. And planted in the front yard was a large real estate sign. A bright red sticker stretched across it. One word. Sold. Not listed. Not available. Not under contract. Sold. I stared at the picture. Then I zoomed in. Then I stared again. My heart hammered against my ribs. There had to be some mistake. I hadn't listed my house. I hadn't spoken to a realtor. I hadn't signed a single document. In fact, I wasn't even in the country. I immediately called Mrs. Brooks. She answered on the first ring. Hannah, she said nervously. Please tell me that's fake. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. Oh, honey, I wish it was. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What do you mean? There were movers there last weekend. I stopped breathing. Movers? Your mother was supervising everything. For a moment I thought I'd heard her wrong. My mother? Yes. The room suddenly felt smaller. My mother had a spare key. But she wasn't supposed to be moving anything. Especially not my belongings. Especially not my grandfather's belongings. Mrs. Brooks hesitated before speaking again. I thought you knew. I didn't. Another silence. Then she quietly said something that made my stomach drop. The buyers have already been inside. Buyers. Not visitors. Not contractors. Buyers. Someone apparently believed they owned my house. My house. The house my grandfather, Samuel Carter, spent 50 years restoring with his own hands. The house he left specifically to me. I thanked Mrs. Brooks and ended the call. Then I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Nothing added up. Legally, a house can't simply disappear. Property ownership doesn't work that way. Documents are required. Signatures are required. Verification is required. At least that's what I believed. But something deep inside me kept whispering the same terrible question. What if someone signed for me? I pushed the thought away. No. Impossible. Even my family wouldn't do that. Would they? I wish I could tell you that was the moment I realized the truth. It wasn't. Because when you're betrayed by strangers, your instincts warn you. When you're betrayed by family, your heart fights the truth every step of the way. The strange behavior had actually started weeks earlier. I just hadn't noticed it. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. A month before I left for Spain, my mother, Linda Carter, suddenly became very interested in my house. She asked questions she had never asked before. Where were the property papers? Did I keep copies? Who handled the legal records? At the time, I thought she was simply curious. Now I know better. A few days later, my younger brother, Kyle, called me out of nowhere. That alone was unusual. Kyle rarely contacted me unless he needed something. Money. A favor. Advice. Usually money. Yet during that call he kept asking strange questions about my future plans. Was I planning to sell the house someday? Did I ever think about moving? Had anyone offered to buy it? I laughed and told him no. The house wasn't going anywhere. It was the one thing in my life I would never sell. The conversation ended awkwardly. At the time I didn't think much about it. Now I replay every word. Every pause. Every question. Every lie hidden between them. Because while I was preparing for an important overseas project, my family was preparing for something else entirely. And I was about to discover just how far they were willing to go. Sitting alone in that hotel room, I opened my laptop and logged into the county property records database. My hands were shaking. I typed in the address, pressed enter, and waited. A loading symbol spun across the screen. Then the record appeared. The moment I saw it, every ounce of blood drained from my face. Because according to the official records, my house had already been sold. And somehow, the paperwork showed my signature. A signature I had never written. The signature on the screen looked enough like mine to fool a stranger. But it didn't fool me. I had signed engineering reports, contracts, permits, and technical documents for more than a decade. Thousands of signatures. I knew every curve of my handwriting, every letter, every stroke. And this wasn't mine. At first glance, it looked convincing. The H was close. The last name looked almost right. But the longer I stared at it, the more obvious the differences became. Someone had tried to copy my signature. Someone who had practiced. Someone who had studied it carefully. A chill ran through me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a paperwork error. Someone had intentionally forged my name. And somehow they had managed to sell my house. For several minutes, I simply sat there staring at the screen. Then the engineer inside me took over. Panic wouldn't help. Evidence would. I downloaded every document available in the public records system. The sales agreement. The deed. The transfer forms. Everything. The further I dug, the worse it became. According to the records, the property had been sold 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, strangers had legally believed they owned my house. For 6 weeks, my family had said nothing. For 6 weeks, everyone involved had acted like I didn't exist. I felt sick. But then I noticed something else. A detail that made my heart start pounding again. The date. The documents claimed I signed them on April 14th. I immediately opened my work calendar. April 14th. I knew exactly where I had been. I wasn't in America. I wasn't even close. On that day, I had spent nearly 14 hours at a construction site outside Madrid. My company required electronic badge scans for every employee entering and leaving, which meant there was proof. Proof that I couldn't possibly have signed those documents. I pulled up the records. There it was. 6:12 a.m. Badge scan. Madrid. 7:41 p.m. Badge scan. Madrid. The deed claimed I was signing papers in my hometown at the exact same time. It was impossible. And impossible is a beautiful thing when you're trying to prove fraud. For the first time since seeing the photo, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Whoever did this had made a mistake. A huge one. And I was going to find it. I decided to call my mother. Not because I expected honesty. Because I wanted answers. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hannah," she said brightly. Her cheerful tone instantly irritated me. "Hi, Mom. How's Spain?" I ignored the question. Why is there a sold sign in front of my house? Silence. A long silence. The kind that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Then she laughed. A nervous laugh. "Oh, that." My grip tightened around the phone. "Yes. That. Honey, we were going to tell you." My stomach twisted. "Tell me." The house was already sold. The buyers had already moved in. And she was talking like she'd forgotten to mention a dinner reservation. "What exactly were you going to tell me?" Another pause. Then her voice changed. Softer. "Careful. We did what we thought was best." "We." Not I. "We." Meaning she wasn't alone. Kyle was involved. Maybe my father too. The realization hit me like a punch. Who sold my house? "Hannah, don't be dramatic." My jaw clenched. "Dramatic? The market was perfect," she continued. "The offer was incredible. I could barely believe what I was hearing. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't apologizing. She was justifying it, as though selling someone else's house was a normal family decision. "Mom." "What?" "Who signed the paperwork?" The silence returned. This time it lasted even longer. Then I heard someone speaking in the background. A familiar voice. "Kyle." And what he said made my blood boil. "Tell her about the beach villa." Beach villa. For a second I thought I misheard him. Then my mother sighed. "Hannah, your brother needed help." There it was. The truth. At least part of it. Kyle again. Always Kyle. The golden child. The favorite. The one everyone protected. The one who never faced consequences. Suddenly dozens of strange memories started connecting. Kyle's expensive vacations. His social media posts. The luxury resorts. the designer clothes, the mysterious money he never seemed to earn. It all made sense now. Or at least enough of it. They sold my house and used the money to fund his lifestyle. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like ice splitting beneath someone's feet. "Mom," I said calmly. "Yes. Did you forge my signature?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Then she whispered something that changed everything. It should have been mine anyway. I closed my eyes. There it was. The real reason. Not Kyle. Not money. Not family. Jealousy. For years my grandfather had chosen me. Not because I was special. Because I showed up. I visited. I helped. I cared. And she had never forgiven him for it. Even after his death. Even now. The bitterness was still alive. "Hannah." I ended the call. No goodbye. No argument. No screaming. Just silence. Because I finally understood something important. The people who stole my house weren't going to confess. They were going to defend themselves. Which meant I needed something stronger than emotion. I needed proof. And I was about to find the piece of evidence that would destroy their entire plan. Because hidden near the bottom of the property documents was a name. A notary. Someone who had officially verified my identity during the signing. The problem? I had never met that person. And when I looked closer at the name, my heart nearly stopped. Because the notary wasn't a stranger. It was someone from my own family. Someone who absolutely knew I was overseas. Someone who had just become part of a criminal conspiracy. I stared at the notary's name for several seconds before my brain finally accepted what my eyes were seeing. Melissa Grant. My cousin. My mother's niece. A woman who had attended family barbecues, birthday parties, and holiday dinners for years. A woman who absolutely knew I was in Spain. A woman who had officially sworn that she watched me sign documents in person. My stomach dropped. Because this wasn't one person making a terrible decision anymore. This was a group effort. A coordinated plan. And every new document seemed to pull another family member into the mess. I leaned back in my hotel chair and rubbed my eyes. Part of me still wanted there to be some innocent explanation. Maybe Melissa had been tricked. Maybe someone lied to her. Maybe there was some misunderstanding I couldn't see yet. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Nobody accidentally notarizes forged documents. Nobody accidentally helps sell a house that doesn't belong to the sellers. This wasn't an accident. It was fraud. And it was getting bigger. The next morning I woke before sunrise. I barely slept. My mind had spent the entire night replaying every conversation I'd had with my family over the past year. The warning signs were everywhere now. Every strange question. Every awkward pause. Every sudden interest in my house. How had I missed it? The answer was simple. Because they were family. And when people love someone, they don't look for betrayal. They look for excuses. I made coffee and sat by the hotel window overlooking the city. Then I called the one person who might have answers. Daniel Brooks. The attorney who handled my grandfather's estate. The attorney who had been present when my grandfather finalized all his legal documents. The attorney I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. The phone rang twice. Then a calm voice answered. Daniel Brooks. "Mr. Brooks, this is Hannah Carter." A brief pause. Then his tone brightened. "Hannah, your grandfather spoke about you constantly." For the first time in days, hearing someone mention Grandpa Samuel almost made me cry. Instead, I took a deep breath and explained everything. The sold sign. The forged signature. The deed. The notary. The buyers. The phone call with my mother. Every detail. Daniel didn't interrupt once. He simply listened. When I finished, there was silence. Not shocked silence. Thinking silence. Then he asked one question. "Hannah, do you remember the documents you signed after your grandfather passed away?" I frowned. Not really. That wasn't something I was proud of. At the time, I was grieving. Exhausted. Overwhelmed. I remembered signing papers. But not much else. Daniel sighed softly. "Your grandfather expected that." "What do you mean?" "He told me you'd probably be too heartbroken to read everything." I sat up straighter. What exactly did I sign? Another pause. Then Daniel said something that changed the entire case. "Hannah, your grandfather didn't leave the house directly to you." I blinked. "What?" "He transferred it into a protected trust several years before his death." I felt my pulse quicken. A trust? Yes. My confusion grew. The county records showed the house under my name. The sale documents showed my name. Nothing made sense anymore. Daniel continued. The trust owns the property. I stared out the hotel window. Suddenly, I wasn't sure I understood anything. If the trust owns the house. My voice trailed off. Then realization hit me. I slowly finished the sentence. Then my family couldn't legally sell it. Correct. The room became completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was thinking, analyzing, connecting pieces. And the pieces were starting to form a picture. If the trust owned the property, then every document my family signed was worthless. The sale itself might be invalid. The buyers might not legally own the house. The money might be recoverable. Everything might be reversible. Daniel must have sensed my thoughts, because his next words nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Hannah. Yes. Your grandfather knew this might happen. I froze. What? He never said exactly who he was worried about. Daniel paused. But he was worried. Suddenly memories flooded back. Grandpa sitting on the porch swing. Grandpa organizing paperwork. Grandpa insisting on meeting with lawyers. Grandpa carefully storing documents. At the time, I thought he was simply being responsible. Now I wondered if he had seen something I hadn't. Something about my family. Something dangerous. Daniel continued. Samuel was one of the most prepared clients I've ever had. What does that mean? It means he built protections into everything. My pulse quickened. What kind of protections? The attorney took a deep breath. Then he said the sentence that changed the entire war. Hannah, your grandfather added a special clause. I waited. Anyone who attempted to obtain trust property through fraud would automatically lose their inheritance rights. The words hit me like lightning. I almost dropped the phone. What? You heard me correctly. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Because my mother and brother weren't just trying to steal my house. According to Daniel, they may have destroyed their own inheritance in the process. I stood and walked toward the hotel window. The city lights stretched across the darkness below. Thousands of people living their lives, completely unaware that my entire future had just changed. How much are we talking about? I finally asked. Daniel's answer came immediately. Roughly $50,000 each. I closed my eyes. My mother had spent years resenting my grandfather's decision. Years believing she deserved more. Years convincing herself she was the victim. And now her own greed might cost her everything. The irony was almost unbelievable. But Daniel wasn't finished. Hannah, there's another issue. A knot formed in my stomach. What now? The people who bought the house. I immediately thought of the family living there. The innocent buyers. The strangers caught in this disaster. What about them? They likely had no idea. I nodded. I know. And because they acted in good faith, we need to handle this carefully. I understood. The real villains weren't the buyers. The real villains shared my last name. Daniel lowered his voice. Hannah, before we do anything else, I need certified copies of every document. I can get them. Good. Then what? The attorney's answer was calm. Professional. Certain. Then we start building a case. I looked at the forged deed on my laptop screen. The fake signature. The fake approval. The lies. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid. Because my grandfather had seen the storm coming years before it arrived. And he had quietly built a trap. A legal trap. One my family had already stepped into. The only thing left was to find out just how much damage they had done. And when the certified documents finally arrived 5 days later, I discovered something hidden in the paperwork that made this case far worse than simple forgery. Because my family hadn't created just one fake document. They had created two. And the second forgery was even more dangerous than the first. By the time the certified documents arrived at my hotel in Spain, I already knew my family had lied. What I didn't know was how deep those lies went. The thick envelope sat on the desk in my room all afternoon. I didn't open it immediately. Not because I was afraid. Because I wanted a clear head. Some documents change your life. This was one of them. That evening, after returning from the project site, I locked my hotel room door, made a cup of coffee, and carefully opened the package. Inside were certified copies of every document connected to the sale of my house. Official. Stamped. Recorded. Legal. Or at least they were pretending to be. I spread everything across the desk and started reading. The forged deed was exactly as I expected. Fake signature. Fake verification. Fake authority. But halfway through the file, I found something that made my stomach tighten. A second document. A power of attorney. I blinked. Then read it again. According to this document, I had supposedly granted my father authority to act on my behalf. Meaning he could legally sign property documents for me. Meaning he could legally help sell my house. Meaning whoever created this document knew the forged deed alone wasn't enough. They needed a backup lie. A bigger lie. And just like the deed, the signature wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time. My father. My own father. The man who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The man who used to cheer at my school events. The man who once promised nobody would ever hurt me. His name was sitting on a forged legal document. Helping steal my house. Something inside me finally broke. Not anger. Not sadness. Trust. The last piece of it. The next morning I called Daniel Brooks. The moment he answered, I told him about the second forgery. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his voice became very serious. Hannah. Yes. This changes everything. I already knew that. How bad is it? Much worse than I originally thought. I sat down. Daniel continued. A forged deed is serious. I know, but a forged power of attorney shows planning. My stomach dropped. Planning. Not impulse. Not panic. Planning. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bad decision made in desperation. It was a scheme. One that likely took weeks. Maybe months. The realization hit harder than anything else. Because strangers commit crimes for money. Family members commit crimes because they believe they're entitled to what belongs to you. And entitlement can be far more dangerous. Over the next week, Daniel and I worked almost daily. While my coworkers focused on bridge inspections, I focused on evidence. Every lunch break. Every evening. Every spare moment. We built a timeline. The timeline was devastating. My mother's strange questions about property documents. Kyle's sudden interest in the house. The realtor contacting me before I left. The forged paperwork. The notary involvement. The suspicious vacation. Everything connected. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. They had been planning this long before I boarded my flight. Long before Grandpa's death. Possibly even before the inheritance was finalized. The more evidence we gathered, the clearer the picture became. And every new discovery hurt worse than the last. Because every new discovery involved someone I loved. Or used to love. Then came the call that changed everything. It was Friday evening. I was reviewing project reports when Daniel's name appeared on my phone. I answered immediately. You found something? I did. His tone was different. Excited. Confident. The way people sound when they know they've won. What is it? The trust documents. My heart started racing. What about them? Daniel took a breath. Then said something that made me sit upright. The protective clause has almost certainly been triggered. I closed my eyes. My grandfather. Even after his death. Even now. He was still protecting me. Daniel explained that if the court determined my mother and Kyle knowingly participated in fraud involving trust property, they would lose every inheritance benefit connected to the trust. Every dollar. Every asset. Everything. The very thing they were trying to steal could end up costing them far more. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Because justice was finally becoming possible. 12 days later, my project ended. The final inspection was approved. The reports were signed. And I boarded a flight home. The entire trip felt surreal. While passengers watched movies and slept, I stared out the window. Thinking. Remembering. Preparing. When the plane finally landed, I didn't go to my apartment. I didn't visit friends. I didn't even unpack. I rented a car and drove straight to my house. Or what used to be my house. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. I knew it would hurt. I just didn't know how much. Then I turned onto the street. And saw it. The sold sign was still there. Standing proudly in the yard. Like a trophy. Like a monument to betrayal. I parked across the street. For several minutes I couldn't move. I simply stared. The white walls. The green shutters. The porch. The swing Grandpa built with his own hands. Everything looked familiar. Yet nothing felt the same. Then I noticed movement inside. People. The new owners. Living their lives. Completely unaware of the nightmare surrounding them. And suddenly I didn't feel anger toward them. Only sympathy. Because they had been deceived too. Just like me. Maybe worse. They had paid for the lie. I finally stepped out of the car. Slowly crossed the street. And walked toward the house. My grandfather's brass key was still in my pocket. Without thinking, I pulled it out. The old metal felt warm in my hand. For a moment, I stood there looking at it, remembering Grandpa, remembering everything. Then I reached the front door and slipped the key into the lock. My heart pounded. The key turned. Perfectly. The lock still recognized it. The house still recognized it. I could have walked inside. I could have demanded answers. I could have created a scene. But I didn't. Because I wasn't my mother. I wasn't Kyle. I wasn't going to act emotionally. I was going to win legally. So I turned the key back, slipped it into my pocket, and walked away. What I didn't know was that less than 24 hours later, I would come face to face with my parents. And during that meeting, my father would proudly admit something so shocking that it would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. The next evening, I stood outside my parents' house with one hand resting on the steering wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there, looking at the familiar front porch. The same porch where I had celebrated birthdays. The same porch where my father taught me how to throw a baseball. The same porch where my mother used to wave goodbye before school. Funny how a place can stay exactly the same while the people inside become strangers. I finally got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. My mother, Linda, froze. For half a second, genuine surprise flashed across her face. Then it disappeared behind a practiced smile. Hannah. She stepped forward as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't secretly sold my house. As if she hadn't forged my name. As if we were just a normal family having a normal visit. You should have told us you were coming home. I let her hug me. Not because I wanted to. Because I wanted her comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. And I was done making them. Inside, my father sat in his recliner watching television. Kyle lounged on the couch scrolling through his phone. The moment I entered, all three of them looked nervous. Good. For weeks, I had been the one living with fear. Now it was their turn. How was Spain? Kyle asked casually. I ignored him. I looked directly at my mother, then my father, then my brother, and asked a simple question. Who sold my house? The room instantly went silent. The television kept playing. Nobody spoke. Finally, my mother sighed dramatically, as though she were the victim. Hannah, we've already talked about this. No, I replied calmly. You talked. I listened. The difference mattered. My father shifted in his chair. The market was hot. I looked at him. That's your explanation? We got a good price. We. There was that word again. Not I. We. A family decision. A family crime. My mother crossed her arms. You weren't even living there. The sentence hung in the air. And suddenly everything became clear. To them, my absence was permission. Because I was overseas. Because I was working. Because I wasn't physically standing in front of the house. They convinced themselves it didn't belong to me anymore. They convinced themselves they had a right. The worst lies are the ones people tell themselves. I listened quietly while they justified everything. The market. The timing. Kyle's financial problems. Family needs. Excuses stacked on top of excuses. Then my father said something that made my heart stop. Something I would later remember word for word. That house paid for all of us to finally enjoy life. The room went silent. My mother looked at him. Kyle looked at him. Even they seemed surprised he had said it out loud. But the damage was done. Because what my father had just admitted was huge. He knew it was my house. Not theirs. Mine. And he knew they sold it anyway. I kept my face calm. Inside, my mind was already filing the statement away. Evidence. Just another piece of evidence. One more brick in the wall they had built around themselves. And one more reason that wall was about to collapse. I left 15 minutes later. No shouting. No accusations. No threats. Just silence. That seemed to confuse them more than anger would have. As I drove away, my phone rang. Daniel Brooks. I answered immediately. How did it go? Exactly how we expected. And my father practically admitted everything. Daniel laughed softly. Good. For the first time, I heard confidence in his voice. Not hope. Confidence. The kind that comes from knowing the facts are on your side. Then he told me something important. The forensic handwriting expert had completed her report. My pulse quickened. What did she find? The signature on the deed isn't yours. I smiled. I already knew that. Now we can prove it. That was different. Knowing and proving aren't the same thing. The report compared my genuine signatures to the forged ones. The conclusion was absolute. The signature had been created by another person. No uncertainty. No ambiguity. No loopholes. Someone forged my name. And now we had an expert willing to testify under oath. A few days later, another breakthrough arrived. One that hit my family even harder. The state notary office launched an investigation into Melissa Grant, the cousin who notarized the fake documents. Investigators requested her notary records, her journals, her logs, everything. And when they reviewed her records, they found something alarming. There was no entry for the day she supposedly witnessed my signature. None. The required records simply didn't exist, which meant Melissa couldn't prove I was ever there. Because I wasn't. She knew it. The investigators knew it. And soon everyone else would know it too. The walls were closing in. Fast. The next week brought even more bad news for my family. A detective from the County Fraud Division contacted Daniel. After reviewing the forged deed, forged power of attorney, passport records, travel documents, and forensic report, the department officially opened a criminal investigation. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't an argument over inheritance. This was potential felony fraud. Real consequences. Real charges. Real prison records. When Daniel called to tell me, I sat quietly for several minutes. Not celebrating. Not smiling. Just absorbing it. Because despite everything, these were still people I once loved. But they had made their choices. Over and over again. And now those choices were catching up with them. 3 days later my phone exploded with messages. My mother. My father. Kyle. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Everyone suddenly wanted to talk. Everyone suddenly wanted peace. Funny how people discover forgiveness when consequences arrive. The messages followed the same pattern. Let's handle this privately. We're family. Don't involve the authorities. Think about what this could do to your parents. Not one message asked what they had done to me. Not one. I ignored every single one. Then a final text arrived from my mother. A single message. Short. Simple. Dangerous. Sunday. Family meeting. Everyone will be there. Let's settle this. I stared at the screen. For a long time. Then I smiled. Because I knew exactly what she was trying to do. Pressure. Manipulation. Guilt. The same tricks that had worked my entire life. Only this time, something had changed. This time I had documents. This time I had proof. And this time I wasn't coming alone. Because by Sunday afternoon, my entire family would gather expecting me to back down. Instead, they were about to hear evidence that would destroy every lie they had told. And before that meeting ended, someone in that backyard was going to crack. Sunday arrived warm and bright. The kind of afternoon that looked perfect from the outside. Blue sky. Light breeze. Birds singing. The kind of day families usually spend making happy memories. Instead, mine was about to fall apart. I parked across the street from my parents' house and sat in the car for a moment. Watching. Preparing. The backyard was already full. My mother hadn't invited people to solve a problem. She'd invited them to create pressure. My aunts were there. 2 uncles. Several cousins. Even Melissa stood near the patio looking pale and exhausted. And hanging from the old maple tree nearby was the wooden porch swing Grandpa Samuel built years ago. The sight of it tightened my chest. For a second, I almost felt like he was watching. Waiting. Seeing how all of this would end. I grabbed my folder from the passenger seat and walked toward the backyard. Every document was inside. The forged deed. The fake power of attorney. The expert reports. The trust records. Everything. Weeks of evidence. Weeks of patience. Weeks of silence. Today, the silence was ending. The moment I stepped into the yard, conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward me. My mother immediately put on her performance smile. Hannah. I nodded. Mom. She walked forward carrying a tray of lemonade. The same thing she'd done my entire life, whenever she wanted people to think everything was normal. Let's sit down and talk. I sat. Not because she asked. Because I wanted everyone present to hear every word. My father stood beside the grill, pretending to be relaxed. Kyle lounged in a lawn chair. But I could see the tension in his face. The confidence he'd shown weeks ago was gone. Reality had finally arrived. My mother started first. Of course she did. She always liked controlling the story. We're all here because this situation has gotten out of hand. Several relatives nodded. I stayed silent. We've always been a family that solves problems together. More nodding. Then she looked directly at me. Hannah has involved lawyers and investigators over what should have been a private family matter. Private family matter. The phrase almost made me laugh. Forgery. Fraud. Theft. Apparently those were private family matters now. One aunt cleared her throat. Hannah, maybe things have gotten a little emotional. Emotional. Interesting choice of word. Not criminal. Not dishonest. Emotional. I glanced at my folder. Not yet. Let them talk. My father stepped forward next. The house wasn't being used. I said nothing. You were overseas. Silence. We needed help. Still silence. Then Kyle finally joined in. It was just a house. The words hung in the air. Just a house. To him it was just a building. To me it was every memory I had left of my grandfather. Every lesson. Every summer. Every holiday. Every promise. But I wasn't there to argue feelings. I was there to present facts. Then my father made his mistake. The biggest mistake of the afternoon. He pointed toward me and laughed. That house paid for our vacation. The backyard fell silent. He didn't realize what he'd done. But I did. Because once again he openly admitted the house belonged to me. Not them. Me. Another confession. Another witness-filled statement. Another brick removed from their defense. I slowly opened my folder. The sound alone seemed to make everyone nervous. My mother stopped talking. Kyle sat up. Melissa looked like she wanted to disappear. Good. I placed the first document on the table. This is the deed used to sell the house. Nobody spoke. I placed down the second. This is the signature supposedly written by me. Then another stack. These are 15 real signatures from my work records. Several relatives leaned forward. The difference was obvious. Painfully obvious. Then I placed down the forensic report. The handwriting expert concluded the deed signature is forged. Aunt Carol's eyes widened. What? I calmly continued. This signature was not written by me. The yard became very quiet. Then I laid down my passport. Opened to the relevant page. According to this deed, I signed the documents on April 14th. I placed another document beside it. My passport shows I was already in Spain. Then another. My work badge records show I entered a construction site at 6:12 a.m. that morning. Then another. And exited at 7:41 p.m. I looked around the table. So unless I learned how to teleport across an ocean. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Then I turned toward Melissa. My cousin immediately looked down. I gently placed the notary records on the table. Melissa officially verified my identity. A long silence followed. Then I spoke again. Except there is one problem. She closed her eyes. The required notary journal entry for that day doesn't exist. A gasp came from somewhere behind me. Melissa started crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way guilty people cry when they know the evidence is real. My mother shot her a warning look. But it was too late. The pressure was finally breaking people. Then I placed the final document on the table. The trust agreement. Grandpa Samuel's trust. The document nobody expected. The document that changed everything. I looked directly at my mother. The house was never yours. The house was never yours. Her face went white. It wasn't mine either. Now everyone looked confused. I pointed to the trust paperwork. The property belongs to Grandpa's trust. Nobody spoke. My father looked lost. Kyle looked terrified. And my mother looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from beneath her. Then I delivered the final blow. And according to the trust terms, anyone who attempts to steal trust property forfeits their inheritance rights. The entire backyard exploded. What? Kyle shouted. My father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. My mother's face twisted with rage. No, but the documents didn't care about her opinion. The documents didn't care about excuses. The documents only cared about facts. And the facts were winning. Then something unexpected happened. Melissa suddenly stood up, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time all afternoon, someone told the truth. I knew she wasn't there. The yard froze. My mother's eyes widened. Melissa looked at me, then at everyone else, and finally whispered the words nobody expected to hear. Linda told me the house really belonged to her. Silence. Absolute silence. The confession hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Damaging. And in that moment, I knew everything had changed. Because the family meeting my mother arranged to pressure me into backing down had just become a public confession. And what happened next would be even worse. Because less than 48 hours later, detectives would begin interviewing people connected to the fraud. And someone in my family was about to make a decision that would save themselves by turning against everyone else. The family meeting ended in complete chaos. People were shouting. Chairs were overturned. My father was furious. Kyle looked like he was about to be sick. And my mother, for the first time in my life, she looked genuinely scared. Not angry. Not offended. Scared. Because the story she had spent months building had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. And everyone had watched it happen. I quietly gathered my documents back into the folder. One page at a time. No rushing. No celebrating. No dramatic speeches. The evidence spoke for itself. As I walked toward my car, I heard my mother yelling my name. I didn't stop. For years, she had ignored my voice when it mattered. Now it was my turn to keep walking. Before I go any further, I'd love to know what you would have done in my situation. Would you have forgiven them, or taken the same legal route I did? Let me know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this story so far, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true story-style dramas. 2 days later, the investigation officially expanded. Detectives began interviewing everyone connected to the forged documents. Melissa was first, then the realtor, then the closing agent, then my parents, then Kyle. The pressure started building immediately. Because lies are easy to tell. Keeping them straight is much harder. Especially when investigators compare every statement. And that's exactly what happened. Melissa admitted she had notarized documents without verifying my identity. The realtor admitted my mother handled nearly every conversation. The closing agent admitted he never spoke directly with me. Each statement created another crack in the story. Another crack became a hole. And the hole became impossible to hide. Then came the moment that changed everything. Kyle broke. I wasn't in the interview room. I learned about it later through Daniel Brooks. Apparently Kyle arrived convinced he could talk his way out of trouble. That confidence lasted less than an hour. Detectives showed him documents. Emails. Financial transfers. Vacation records. Phone logs. Everything. When they explained the potential consequences, his loyalty disappeared. Fast. Kyle told them who came up with the plan, who contacted the realtor, who pushed the sale, who convinced Melissa to cooperate. And according to his statement, the entire idea started with my mother. The golden child had finally realized something important. My mother might save herself, but she wouldn't save him. So he saved himself first. Over the following months, the legal battle moved forward. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, exactly the way Daniel promised. The forged deed was challenged in court. The trust documents were reviewed. Experts testified. Records were examined. And piece by piece, the truth became undeniable. The judge ultimately ruled that the property transfer was invalid from the beginning. The forged signature alone was enough. The house had never legally left the trust, meaning the sale should never have happened, meaning my family had sold something they didn't own, meaning my grandfather's protections had worked exactly as intended. Even years after his death, the innocent buyers were protected through title insurance. I was relieved about that. They had done nothing wrong. They were victims too. They recovered their financial losses and eventually purchased another home. The young nurse later sent me a handwritten card. Inside she wrote, "Your grandfather must have been a remarkable man." I still keep that card. Because she was right. He was. The criminal case took even longer. Nearly 2 years. But eventually the outcome arrived. My parents accepted plea agreements rather than risk trial. Melissa did the same. The public record would follow them for the rest of their lives. As for Kyle, his cooperation reduced his penalties significantly, though his relationship with the rest of the family was destroyed forever. Ironically, the same selfishness that helped create the fraud ended up exposing it. Then came the final surprise. The one Grandpa Samuel had planned years earlier. The inheritance clause. The clause nobody took seriously. The clause everyone ignored. The clause that changed everything. Because by participating in the fraudulent transfer of trust property, my mother and Kyle triggered the forfeiture provision. Exactly as Grandpa predicted. They lost every inheritance benefit connected to the trust. Every dollar. Every asset. Gone. My grandfather had seen the danger years before anyone else. And he had quietly built a safeguard. Not out of anger. Out of wisdom. That autumn, I finally moved back into the house. My house. The house with the green shutters. The house with the porch swing. The house everyone tried to take. Walking through the front door felt strange at first. The rooms were familiar. Yet everything felt different. Maybe because I was different. Some betrayals change a person permanently. This was one of them. I spent months restoring the property, repairing damage, rebuilding rooms, bringing it back to life. The porch swing stayed exactly where Grandpa left it. Weathered, strong, unmoving, just like the lessons he taught me. A year later, I used part of the trust funds to create something new. The Samuel Carter Memorial Scholarship, a program for students entering engineering, construction, and skilled trades. Young people willing to work hard. Young people willing to earn what they receive. The kind of people Grandpa respected most. The first scholarship recipient wanted to become a bridge engineer. When I heard that, I laughed and cried at the same time. Because life has a funny way of coming full circle. People still ask if I hate my family. The answer surprises them. No, I don't hate them. Hate requires energy. And I spent enough energy surviving what they did. What I feel now is something simpler. Distance. Peace. Acceptance. They made their choices. I made mine. And the consequences belong to everyone equally. The biggest lesson wasn't about fraud, or inheritance, or courts. It was about trust. Because sometimes the people you trust most are the people who test you hardest. And sometimes the quiet person in the room isn't weak. They're simply waiting for the facts to speak. My grandfather used to tell me, a house isn't just wood and nails. It's a promise you keep. For a while, I thought that promise was about property. Now I know better. The promise was about character. About doing the right thing when nobody is watching. About protecting what matters. And about never surrendering the truth. The brass key Grandpa gave me still hangs beside the front door. Every night before bed, I check the lock. Twice. Exactly the way he taught me. And every time I do, I'm reminded of something important. They thought a quiet woman would be easy to steal from. They were only half right. I was quiet, but I was never easy to steal from. And if someone you love is the dependable one everyone takes for granted, send this their way. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.